This is the AM show. Welcome back. We get into our big stories and we kickstart the conversation from the standpoint of that latest report, which shows that in the third quarter of last year, about 1.5 million Ghanaians aged between 15 and 24 years. That, by the way, that age group constitutes about 24.2% of them were neither in some form of education, employment, or training. Well, there are myriad consequences of that, and we're going to be exploring them with our guest this morning, Dr. Pearl Che. Now, she's a lecturer at the Regional Institute for Population Studies, that is RIPS of the University of Ghana. Dr. Che, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us on the AM show. You would have to unmute, Dr. Che.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I can hear you very well.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Good morning.
Right.
Thank you for having me.
What do you make of the latest reports? It makes for cold reading in terms of the numbers. In summary, what do you make of this latest revelation?
Yeah, so first of all, I think the press release was done in to raise awareness on World Youth Skills Day, which is really supposed to highlight the importance of equipping our youth with employable skills to be able to transition to the labor force and really live productive lives and also contribute to the development of the nation. So this report, the statistics in the report were released earlier in the year, I think in May. And yes, the number of the proportion, which is about a quarter, is really about the global percent, which is 23%. And globally, it's a concern. So definitely, if we are recording the same proportion as the global number, which is a concern, then it's something that we need to be concerned about.
And in terms of Ghana's statistics, when you look at our population as per the latest census, and you look at the figures we are putting out as far as youth unemployment is concerned, and not just youth unemployment, youth not engaged in education, not engaged in employment, not engaged in training, what picture does that paint?
So let me first talk about the youth not engaged in employment, in education, employment, or training. I mean, it's actually one of the SDG indicators, right. SDG 8.6, really because of the importance, because what has been seen in other studies is that when you have youth that are not engaged in any of these three, then their risk of really being socially excluded is high because they're not working, they're not in school, they likely don't have the skills to help them to get those jobs that would lead them, to have their productive lives. So really the goal for every nation to be to try to make sure that the youth are really engaged as productively as possible. And this is, for the report, it's talking about the youth 15 to 24. In terms of the long-term implications, so, demographers talk a lot about what we call the demographic dividends. And it's something that if you look at the development of the East Asian countries, when you equip your youth with skills, when they are highly skilled and they can get, skilled jobs that they can use to take care of themselves and also contribute to the development of the nation, then you put yourself, on a good track for sustainable development. But when the youth do not have those skills, then you really are at risk of not being able to reap that demographic dividend, which is supposed to help you to develop. So really, equipping the youth with skills is very important. And the focus is on skills. So the day was actually Youth Skills Day and not just education, because we know that you may not get everything that you need from the formal educational system. Now, a lot of the things that the ILO and UNESCO talk about in terms of youth skills, we go beyond reading and writing. They talk about employable skills, so things like working with teammates, communicating, problem solving, critical thinking, and more importantly, getting those skills that you need from on-the-job training and work experience. Sometimes the youth do not have that. So it's really important that even as people are going through the formal education system, we find ways to help them to develop these employable skills so that they don't struggle to find jobs when they are out of the formal educational system. And really to encourage people to use alternative sources of learning to complement what they are getting in school to make them employable. And importantly, I forgot also digital skills. I mean, I think UNESCO has said that more than 90% of jobs would be requiring some digital skills. We also have to make sure that our youth have the digital skills. They're able to have access to those devices that they will be able to use to access the internet, or to get information, to communicate with others, to search for jobs. And I know recently there was a census report on digital exclusion, and then we found that really about maybe 1 million or 2 million of the youth were not, had not used an ICT device in the 3 months preceding census night. And that's really not a good thing, because the internet has been shown to be one of the ways that youth can access training opportunities, job opportunities, and also able to develop their skills.
Now, again, it paints quite a picture for Ghana, because it reveals then that 1 in every 4 young persons is an NEET, not engaged in education, employment, or training. That is 24.2%. This is a fourth of the youth bulge, or the youth population. That also makes for stark reading, especially as you contemplate that in the Greater Accra region, you're looking at the number being 312,394, followed by the Ashanti region with 300,161, the Eastern region with over 131,000, and the Central region with 129,000 plus. Now, you spoke about the fact that this is a core component of the SDGs, 8.6. But what does this say about how far Ghana has come or not come in dealing with the situation? COVID-19 came, the Russo-Ukrainian war has also been on our hands. But have we done enough then in this regard?
So honestly, it will be difficult for me to say, because the statistics have not been collected over time to be able to make that assessment. But what we know is that globally, the proportion has increased post-COVID. So the youth unemployment and the youth not in education, employment, or training has increased post-COVID, and it's yet to fall back to pre-COVID level. So we can assume the same pattern is holding clear, but it would not be possible for me to say. Now that we are having these quarterly statistics from the Statistical Service, then we can monitor the trend over time and see how we are doing.
In other words, we would need sustained research. So these studies by the GSS would have to come through for about how long before we can pinpoint what exactly is happening?
So, I mean, globally, they look at it on an annual basis. So I think even, from year to year, we can see whether we are trending. So if we have this is the third quarter. I mean, sometimes there may be some seasonal things influencing what is happening, but we can then see what happens in the third quarter of next year. Then we see whether we are trending upward or downward.
Now, the capital, Accra, and of course Tema, can both be found in the Greater Accra region. But any surprises in terms of the regional dynamics when it comes to the NEETs? Of course, the Greater Accra region first, the Ashanti second. You would also consider population. The Eastern and Central regions. Are you surprised at all? Because if you look at the breakdown, you would find out that in 13 out of the 16 regions, more than 20% of the young people aged between 15 and 24 were not in education, employment, or training. And this also included the Eastern region with a 30% portion, which has the highest population of youth, with a figure of about twice that of the Bono region at 14.5%, which has the lowest proportion. So when you look at the numbers, really, you would see that while the Greater Accra region has the bigger chunk in terms of the over 312,000, followed by the Ashanti region, when you look at the Eastern region, if you look at its youth population, it has the highest proportion of youth NEETs. What do you make of that information? And what should be the guiding policy on this moving forward, do you think?
So I think there are two things. So you mentioned the population issue. So definitely when you have a larger population, we would expect that you have a larger proportion of youth not in education, employment, or training, just because there are more youth in the region. And I think we have seen from the census that, the Greater Accra region, the Ashanti, they do have their youth bulge is a bit more pronounced than the other regions. So it's not surprising to see that they have those numbers. As you mentioned, really the number of regions that have the numbers, above, certain threshold, I think is a cause for concern. One of the reasons we highlight the absolute numbers in addition to the proportions now is because the SDG doesn't want to leave anybody behind. So sometimes the proportions may mask the fact that there are really a large number in a certain place. Now, in terms of what needs to be done, so I think a lot has been proposed internationally on how to help to make, to get more youth engaged. And that is really focusing on giving them the employable skills, because they really need those skills to transition to the workforce. So some people so part of the statistic, it did indicate the proportion that had never been to school. But you see that in addition to those that had never been to school, there's still a gap. So assuming that if the rest of them have all had some education, but they are still currently not in employment or not in training. So this is where the lack of employable skills comes in, because employers want people with experience and some on-the-job skills that you would not get when you are in school. So the key thing really proposed is to try to make sure that, whilst in school, children, students, young people are able to access perhaps career counseling opportunities. So they are able to know that, okay, sometimes I need this skill or that skill, because they may not know if I want to go into this career, I need this particular set of skills. In addition, when you think about things that maybe the educational sector can do, would be to maybe integrate a bit more of the skills that they need in their labor force in school. So for instance, I teach a theory class, but when I give them assignments, I try to make them do presentations to raise funds for policymakers, or to write a development plan, or to do the teamwork. So some of those skills, we can build it into the formal educational system, and then also to do the in-school training, which they talked about. So making sure that while people are in school, they have access to internships and opportunities that they can get to be in the labor force and sees what needs to be done. Then collaboration between the education sector and industry. So there's a bit, more understanding of exactly what do you need, what skills do you need? Are the skills that you need, is it reflected in the curriculum? If it's not, then how can we work together to make sure that those skills are available so that the graduates come out and then have those skills? So I think really the key is to make sure that there's employable skills being developed by the time that youth come out of school, so that they can make the transition to the labor force. And then for those that have not been to school, there should be a way to also reach out to them to make sure that they also develop the employable skills. Because really, one of the things we know is that literacy and numeracy is not enough to succeed in this world anymore. A lot of complex skills are needed in the 21st century labor market. And we really have to try to make sure that all youth have the opportunity to gain those skills.
And that is crucial because, again, if you go back to the 2021 population and housing census, you would actually know that it indicates 1 in every 10, that is 11.1 persons, 11.1% of persons aged between 15 and 24, that constitutes 1.4 million young persons, have never attended school. Now, if you look at the dynamic male-female, you would notice that 12% are female, and they had never attended school, compared to 10.2% in the male category. And particularly worrying when it comes to that aspect is the northern belt of the country, because you look at the Savannah region and it stands at a staggering 43.4%, almost 45%. The northeast, 36.8%, northern, 33.3%, upper west, 20.9%, and then OT, 20.7%. Now, all of these, if you add OT, because OT is right at the junction there with the northern belt. If you add it, it means that the entirety of the northern belt, when you look at the educational quota or quotient, they are in way behind the rest of the country. And I don't know what you think about that, because if you look at the historical antecedents, that even prompted the formation of the Northern People's Party, politically speaking, though it went against the Constitution and we had to do away with that. But the marginalization of the northern belt of the country when it comes to education, what more can we, or should we be seen doing to cut down on these numbers? I mean, 45%, close to 45%, is staggering.
Exactly. And, if we see education as a pathway to changing your life, then if you don't even have the chance to go through the formal education system at all, then you really are at a disadvantage. So the key thing, I mean, for those that are already out of their school going age, I mean, there really has to be ways to reach them, to help them to develop some skills that they can use. But in terms of maybe those that are currently of school going age, there's a lot has been done on why children don't go to school. And even in places where on paper, I mean, there's the schooling is free. It doesn't cost you money to go. So why is it that there are so many children out of school? And I'll touch on a few of those reasons. So the first is, one of the things that has been proposed is really to take a multi-sectoral approach to resolving this problem, because you would really need to tackle things like poverty and hunger before you expect every child to go to school. Because if the family has to send their child to school, has to feed them, has to buy textbooks, has to pay anything, as opposed to maybe letting the child do something that will bring in some economic activity. So when you are poor, I mean, you have to think about all these concerns like food, shelter, your health before the education comes in. So really for poor people, and there's a lot done on the differences between the educational enrollments of those that are poor and those that are not poor, because they just have too many competing interests. So that could be one of the reasons. And then we talk about things such as, the direct and then the indirect sports. So this is the opportunity cost of my time. The child is in school, but they could be out there earning some money to help take care of themselves. So at that point, it's not even the parents that is forcing the child not to go to school. The child could independently make the decision to not go to school because there are more lucrative things happening at the same time rather than being in school. And then you worry about things like, yes, when the school is a bit far away, then parents are reluctant to send especially younger children to school. And the census did release, a proximity to essential services last year, and it's quite interesting to see again in the northern parts of the country a higher proportion of the structures are far away from outside of the recommended 1 kilometer, 3 kilometer, 5 kilometer for the pre-primary, primary, JHS respectively. So the distance is also a challenge. Or sometimes you may go up to primary school and end because there's no JHS within walking distance. So a lot really goes into why children don't go to school. And really, we always talk about the government, but success in school, the parents has a role to play, the child has a role to play, the school has a role to play. So it should be engaging. Children should find it interesting. They should want to learn. They should get the benefits of the education. They should be healthy. They should be happy. They should be properly fed, so that when they go to school, they can concentrate. Their parents should be supportive at home, help them with their homework if there's additional support to be made. So even things like, is there a table in the house? Is there electricity? All these things contribute, to making sure that children can go through school successfully. So we really have to tackle, this proportion of children out of school. And really, when you look at the current school going age, I think those statistics were also released earlier. It's also high in that part of the country. So it's not really the youth, but if you look at those who are 6 to 17 as well. So really, really a cause for concern.
It really is a cause for concern. I've taken stock of the points you've made. It doesn't just behove government to do what it must, but of course there are the challenges to do with the institutions themselves and also parents. Each one of these has a role in that train. But even more so government, because how many private institutions do we have in this country? And how about the public ones which serve the masses? And that is where I have a concern. I don't know how many times you've paid a visit to the northern belt of the country, but we have one of our latest documentaries, The Schools of Shame. I don't know whether you saw that. If you look at the learning conditions across the country, but you look especially at the northern belt of the country, we have schools under trees in many regions, but you look at the northern belt, again, it appears for everything, they are the worst hit. These cannot be, we cannot foster this and think that even if children were encouraged to go to school, they wouldn't. If you've seen the children studying on the bare floor with their knees and their elbows looking all black because they always have to be crawling. If you see those who are on the bare floor, a cemented floor with many holes, jagged ends, with no desks, in some places with no boards, don't think of a whiteboard, no blackboard. Okay? So there's this institution we went to where the teacher had to do what we call air writing, write in the air for the children. I mean, how can you even encourage a child to go to such a place to study? Those are the minimum questions we should be asking.
Of course, and again, a lot of research has been done on what we call the learning environment. So it's not really only just about going to school. The learning environment in the classroom must be conducive, so the children must have a good place to sit. Even things like, they talked about even the color of the classroom. Some colors promote, like maybe the pinks and the yellows, the way the tables and the chairs are arranged, the lighting, the sound. So there's really a lot on making sure that the learning environment is conducive. I mean, same at home as well. The home environment, there should be some place for the children to be able to study comfortably. Unfortunately, most of this research is really not from our setting. So we know that yes, in other maybe developed parts of the world, these are the things they should promote learning. So you're right, it's not just enough to be physically present, but there are all these other things that should make the learning conducive. And really, this is not just a problem that Ghana is facing. There's currently what it's called the global learning crisis. So the World Bank has really talked about the fact that about half of the children in low and middle income countries cannot read and write a short sentence by the end of primary school.
True.
So it's really a global problem. So these are children that have been to school, but they are not able to finish with the minimum learning proficiency that you would expect at that age. And part of it is, yes, due to the lack of infrastructure, the fact that there's inadequate learning materials, and one of the things they've also talked about is even the way assessments are done. So is the educational system able to identify those that are struggling to properly help them to do what needs to be done? So those are all the things that they talk about. And really now there's a lot of concern about this global learning crisis, because it is really going to endanger the global progress towards the SDGs. Because quality education really runs through a number of the SDGs as well. So it's really a global problem, and it's not something that is just peculiar to us.
So let's look at the
environment is not as conducive for learning as it should be.
Mm.
And again, something if it's half of low and middle income countries, and and they say 80% in the poor countries, so it's really a problem.
You mentioned the SDG goals, and rightly so. And we have, for most of them, targets around 2030. We're already in 2023. As we get ready to cap off the conversation, I want us to look at these SDG goals. There's SDG Goal 1 talking about no poverty, Goal 2 talking about zero hunger, and of course, there is Goal 8, which you highlighted. So I just want you to look at the spectrum. No poverty. We're in the midst of a lot of poverty in this country, per these statistics, because, of course, if the young people, about a fourth of them, are not even in employment, they are not in any sort of training, what do you expect them to do? How do they eke out a living? Then zero hunger. If you have no money, if you're impoverished, then your likelihood of getting hungry or going without food is very high. Then we have the third point, which you made mention of, decent work. And this is what SDG 8 spells out. It talks about the key role of decent work for all in achieving sustainable development, being highlighted by Sustainable Development Goal 8, which aims to, quote, promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth full of productive employment and decent work for all. Now, decent work, employment creation, social protection rights at work, and social dialogue represent integral elements of the new 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I find it interesting when it mentions their rights, economic rights. These are things that in our part of the world we don't follow up on. I know in other jurisdictions, people have sued government for, on the back of economic rights, not having work to do. Here, let me just state this bluntly. In political circles, lots of jobs are created for the boys and girls, and we know exactly what we're talking about. Yet the masses are not employed. Administration in, administration out will come and say, oh, we've created X number of jobs. After a short while, you ask yourself, where are the jobs? Those same people are back to square one. So what then should be the way forward for Ghana on this trajectory to enable us come somewhat close to the goal for year 2030?
If you look at so when we talk about the demographic dividend you need to harness for sustainable development, there are 4 pillars to harness what we call the first dividend. And one of them is education, which we've talked about in depth. So really making sure that your labor force has the skills. It's not even about them going to school, because we just talked about the fact that going to school does not necessarily mean that you have the skills. But really making sure that your labor force has the skills to be able to have high-skilled jobs. And the important thing about the job creation for the demographic dividends, they have to be high-skilled jobs. So the person is earning enough money to take care of themselves and to save for their future, so that when they are old, they will not come back and rely on the government or their children to take care of them. But then the high-skilled jobs generate tax revenue for the country. So that's the first pillar. The second one is health. So we actually, you also need a healthy population to harness the dividend. And the health goes beyond just, physical health. You have to be physically, emotionally, mentally healthy, and even things like having the self-confidence and the self-esteem to be able to carry out these high-skilled jobs. Then the third one is the job creation. So the jobs that are created for these skilled youth have to be high-skilled jobs, as I mentioned. And then the fourth pillar is governance. So the governance has to be in place to make sure that all these 3 things are working and it's sustained. So when you look at how the demographic dividend is going to be achieved, these are really the 4 wheels they say that you tend to get to prosperity. And then that's the first step. And then you have a second dividend, which they say is the key to sustainable development. So with the second dividend, your skilled labor force really has to be able to save and accumulate wealth, because one of the challenges that we overlook, when you have a high proportion of the youth that is not employed, or they go through, their labor force working years in maybe, low-skilled, low-paying jobs, is that when they get to retirement age, they are ill-prepared. They are not able to take care of themselves. So now they become a societal, a vulnerable group that society has to protect. So either like the government has to take care of them, or their children have to take care of them. And in these times where the fertility rate is declining, and with this global economic crisis, you cannot rely on your children. So it's really important that we equip the youth to be able to have these high-skilled jobs so that they can save for the future. And then when they are old, they're able to take care of themselves. So that accumulation of skills, and again, additional human capital investment so that they can be skilled and productive even well beyond their retirement age, is the key to the second dividend that we need for sustainable development. So these are really all the things that we need to put in place. And let me just put in my personal page for what I always talk about, financial literacy and saving for the future. Because ultimately, if you are not on the pension scheme and you get there, you need to have something, because that wealth that you accumulate when you retire is what is going to help. So those resources that will be used to support the elderly people, they are self-sufficient, that it can be used for other sectors of the economy. So it's really important that we invest in the things that will help us to reap the first dividend and the second dividend for sustainable development.
And just right before you go, across the world now we're talking not just about security in terms of armaments, in terms of the military or militarization. We're talking about human security concerns, and that feeds into national security concerns. Now, if you have a teeming youth population that is largely unemployed, uneducated, untrained, they are going to saddle whatever economy they find themselves in. So rather than translating these into a skilled workforce, we would have a burden on our society that would have to clothe, feed, provide health for, when maybe their contribution, through no fault of theirs, is not adequate. We can talk about unemployment in terms of those who are purely unemployed, those who are underemployed, they are properly skilled, they don't have jobs matching their work. How much then, from where you sit, is of a national security threat is the cocktail that we have in Ghana, looking at the different percentages we've mentioned, looking at the Northern Belt and education, looking at the entirety of the country, and then the NEETs. How much of a national security concern is it? How much more attention should we be paying to that? That's the final bit I'll throw to you, Doc.
Okay, so we need to pay attention to it. So I'm happy you mentioned the youth bulge. It's actually a theory called the youth bulge theory, which really looks at, well, if you have a youth bulge, these are the things that you need to do, because if you don't make sure that the youth, are productively engaged, then there is the risk of, yes, these concerns about maybe, conflict or, internal crisis. Really, what the research has shown is that it's not that the youth bulge in itself, like having a high youth population in and of itself, leads to these issues. But when you have other conditions such as the high unemployment, when socioeconomic conditions are tough, then it increases the risk that high youth population may lead to other issues. So really, definitely, the bottom line is that the youth needs to be productively engaged, for their own mental well-being, for their own health, and then really for the development of the country, both in the short and the long term.
Thank you so much, Doc, for joining the conversation. We're really grateful. Dr. Pearl Che is a lecturer at the Regional Institute for Population Studies, RIPS of the University of Ghana. Once more, we're grateful, Doc, and do have a good day.
Have a nice day.
All right, so we move on from here. We take a look at malfunctioning traffic lights here in Accra. We'll be telling you about motorists who are worried that these lights could lead to accidents on the road. We'll be checking out a few of them and then speak to the relevant authorities. But that will be much later. Before then, though, we'll, today being a Wednesday, courtesy of EcoBank, the Pan-African Bank, we're coming your way with AM Business. Now, yesterday, we had that business roundtable, if you like, a pre-budget forum. And some players within the business community have been sharing their expectations for the 2023 mid-year budget review. They want government to find diverse ways of addressing Ghana's economic issues rather than focusing solely on the introduction of new taxes. So what is the way forward? We hear from them now.